Welcome to Late Edition Crime Beat Chronicles, a Lee Enterprises podcast. I'm Ambre Moton, the producer and editor of the show, filling in for Nat Cardona, who's taking some well-deserved time off. With the help of the reporters from the Tulsa World, Crime Beat Chronicles spent the month of October telling the story of the Osages and the Reign of Terror in the 1920s. Here's a bonus episode with the paper's Tim Stanley and Randy Krehbiel, going into a little more detail about some of the crimes that took place.
One particular case that is not mentioned in our story, but that I'm aware of, and it was mentioned in David Grann's book, was the case of William Stepson. It's a tribal member who died under mysterious circumstances, and whose grandson is still alive in Osage County. He's a former Osage tribal court chief justice named Marvin Stepson. William Stepson, apparently, from what we know, he'd gone out with some friends, came in later that night, laid down in his bed, and died. And he had been out. I think he'd probably been drinking. This is another way that this could have happened. Is again considering the historical context and the era of prohibition, unregulated alcohol, bootleg whiskey, moonshine. Everybody consumed this stuff. It was unregulated. It was not uncommon for someone to get, a bad batch of alcohol, of moonshine, and die from it. This was another way that you could potentially kill someone if you wanted to, is just spike their whiskey. That may be what happened to William Stepson, is that he got some bad whiskey. His grandson, Marvin, who believes, based on what he knows, he believes that it was strychnine, which was a poison that was very common and easy to come by and very, very effective. But it made no sense. It still makes no sense to Marvin that, this perfectly otherwise healthy young man, his grandfather William, just went out for a night. Everything was fine, comes home and dies in bed in his sleep. In a lot of the lists that you see of the 24 victims, you will see William Stepson's name. I think it's been pretty commonly accepted among the people who've looked into this that we know enough in the case of William Stepson to declare him a victim. Although, again, like in other similar deaths, his was never investigated as homicide. There's just so many opportunities to kill someone discreetly. I don't know if that's the right word, but you didn't have to shoot somebody. In fact, if you were going to shoot them, maybe, it's hard to say why, Henry Roan and some of the others were killed as violently as they were, which would draw attention, to the fact that something was amiss, that a killer was afoot, unless it was to inspire terror. But so many of these other ones that were not necessarily connected to William Hale and his conspirators, maybe a Marvin Stepson, or others. It's just hard to say. It could always be a family member, and that's just one of the sad facts of this story is how quickly or how greed could lead someone to kill a loved one, to get access to their wealth. That could be what we're talking about here with Stepson and any number of others who died under suspicious circumstances like that. David Grann's book and the movie, they each pull out the figure or the character of Molly Burkhart and make her kind of the central figure in the story. But Molly ultimately survives an attempt on her life. But her family was hit as hard as any, as far as we know, in this story. She lost her wife, Molly lost a sister, potentially two sisters. and then her mother as well. And then did survive an attempt on her life. But one of her sisters, Anna Brown, is also sort of pivotal in the story because she is considered really to be the first victim. Now, again, it depends on where you start counting. Anna Brown was clearly a homicide. Again, like Henry Roan, she was shot in the head and found in the countryside outside of town. But she's generally recognized as the first victim of what would become known as the Reign of Terror. And she was a sister to Molly Burkhart. And they also had a sister named Rita Smith. Rita would also be killed. She was killed later. That one family, I mean, so many of the graves in the tribal cemetery there in Gray Horse, just where it's located in Osage County. So many of the graves there are of family members of Molly's, and Molly's is there too. She would die years later, not of suspicious circumstances, although undoubtedly the stress from this ordeal, and she was already in poor health. Undoubtedly, I mean, it affected her, and she didn't live too much longer. Too many more years after this. But yeah, Molly's family, just a traditional Osage family. Her mother, still believed very much in the old ways. Molly and her sisters were more, I guess, assimilated, so to speak. They had taken up. Anna Brown, yeah, she was found fatally shot May 1921. She disappeared days earlier. So she's considered really the first, although, again, we could go back and probably find some suspicious deaths.
Taking charge of your future starts with taking the first steps. And saving up to $30 a month on Cox Internet with the Affordable Connectivity Program makes those steps easy to take. Whether they bring you to click upload on your first short film, or join now for an online book club. Applying is easy. See if you qualify at cox.com/ACP. Non-transferable one per household. Application and eligibility decisions are made by the FCC.
With the Osages, when they started, they all had equal shares. So any Osage was worth, some sort of money from their head right. Whereas with the Muskogees and the Cherokees, their mineral rights were tied to their individual allotment. So if you were a member of one of those tribes that had a particularly valuable allotment, you could be targeted. And so in some cases, 1906, 1907, 1908, there were people who were disappearing. Some of them turned up alive somewhere else. Some of them were never found. There's a story about a Creek boy, for instance, who went missing, and they all thought he had been killed. Well, it turned out one of his some businessmen had sent him to England to get him out of the way. They got him to sign a lease on his allotment, and they sent him to England to get him out of the way, but he was still alive. Anyway, as far as the Osage, it really began to intensify. It seems like probably around 1920, and it coincides with when the height of the boom.
Now, your article mentions in Osage a young woman being kidnapped, I believe. Is that the woman you were referencing when you were talking about how she held 8 head rights or something?
Yeah, that's who I was thinking of. Yeah, This was, this was, I think it was in the late 20s. But people would find a way to, and this, especially white people, would find a way to get power over, get control of somebody with a lot of head rights. In her case, there was some kind of a marriage or something set up with a local guy who apparently was just a front for some bigger group. And he took her off to Colorado Springs and and kept her there. And in this case, lots of times the guardians are portrayed in an unfavorable light. But in this case, now he may have had self-interest, I don't know. But in this case, the guardian went and found her and got her back to Oklahoma, and the ring was broken up. I think there were probably a lot of white people too who were not comfortable, and in some cases were absolutely opposed to what was going on. But I don't want to make it sound like it's an equal thing. But the white people sometimes were affected by the reign of terror too, because there were a couple of white guys tried to stand up for the Osages, and they were murdered. And so it really was a reign of terror. It was pretty much on everybody who lived there in one way or another. And again, I want to stress, I'm not equating everybody the same, but it trickled down to a lot of different people.
As always, thanks for listening to Late Edition Crime Beat Chronicles. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's ahead.